guys, it's Kevin again, and what a whirlwind it has been these past few weeks for sure. It's been very scary, guys, definitely. I mean, I've already talked in length about this whole pandemic situation and things like that. But you know, because of it, we're all kind of at our homes, we're all in quarantine and things like that. So I figured that what I would do just to, just so I have enough stuff to review and things like that to keep you guys occupied. I normally do these, way later, like around April or so, but I figured because of the situation right now, I might as well do another catch-up review, because I've already seen quite a few movies that are coming out, and there's a lot of streaming releases that are coming very soon that I'm excited to review, so I figured now would be the right time to actually do a catch-up review right now. There's quite a few movies I'm going to be talking about, not a ton of stuff. This is definitely one of the shorter ones I've done. There's about 12 or 13 movies that I'm going to be talking about, but we're just getting to right now. So, the first movie I'm talking about, it's actually kind of awkward, because it's The Informer, and here's the thing. This movie, I don't know when it's going to come out. It has not gotten an official US release date, but I assume that it was coming out in January. Its original, one of its original dates. It's been moved like 5 times and things like that. So I was expecting something really bad here, and I'll say this is not a bad movie, but it's nothing really to write home about. I talked about it briefly in the movie preview, how I've already seen it, and it very much feels like one of those movies that is just hard to market because there just isn't a lot to this one. It's essentially just, you have Joel Kinnaman, and he's been in this crime life for a while. He's trying to do what he can to get out of it, but he keeps getting pulled back in, and it's just not very interesting at all. The story we have going on here is relatively boring. It takes a long time for really anything to happen, and it doesn't get very, the plot describes it as him, like, going to prison to try to, like, get out of this situation, but that doesn't really happen until like an hour into this movie, and the hour preceding that is so boring and dull, and I just didn't really care about much of what was going on. So the story doesn't really do much, and the cast in general just isn't really that great here. Rosamund, Pike, Armas, Clive, Owen, all actors that are pretty much wasted here. Especially Armas, they really have no idea what to do with her. But I think primarily the main reason this doesn't work really boils down to Joel Kinnaman's casting, because the entire film pretty much is relying solely on him. He needs to give a really great performance here. He needs to be convincing as this character, and he's just not. I'm not going to say that he's bad, but this movie proves he is not at a point where he can carry a movie like this. This is not the kind of role for him, and it just very much shows me that I just don't think Kinnaman is that strong of an actor. I think he's much better playing like fun type characters and things like that, but characters like this, he just doesn't do a very good job with, and he just doesn't make this character very interesting at all. So what results is a pretty dull movie. It also contains probably one of the worst Brooklyn accent performances that It also contains probably one of the worst instances of, like, a Brooklyn accent that I've seen from, like, this one actress in the movie. I don't know what her name is, but she's, like, one of the cops here. Absolutely terrible. I couldn't stand her in this movie. I don't know her name or anything like that. And look, maybe she's good, but she's not good in this movie. I know that for a fact. She is not good in this movie. There's a lot of things that really do bring this one down. C- for The Informer. Like I said, there's not an official release date for this one yet in the US, but when it comes out, it's not really worth writing home about. I can definitely see why this one has been delayed so much. Not so much because of the fact that it's bad, but just because there's just not a lot to it, and I just don't see a lot of audiences really getting into it all that much. It's very generic. It's very boring. There just isn't really much to it at all. Just not really worth your time. The Last Full Measure is also not worth your time. Yeah, this is another one that a lot of people did not see. It just randomly came to my theater. I remember only saw the trailer like once for it, and I didn't even know if this was actually like gonna come to theaters because it didn't really have much promotion at all. And again, it's kind of obvious why, because this is a story that could be really interesting. You have these war veterans that, you know, fought in this war and things like that, but they never really got the credit that they deserved, and so because of that, it's very much haunted them. Some of them have some very painful memories, but it's done in the most boring way possible. And I think the main reason for this is that the main character we center around, Sebastian Stan, no fault of his own, he's really good in the movie because Sebastian Stan's a really good actor. But he's just such a bore. There's not really anything to him here. He's just kind of like the reporter that's like trying to get a story out of these guys, when I feel like the movie would have benefited way more if it's centered on one of these characters. You know, whether it was someone like, say, Christopher Plummer or Ed Harris or Samuel Jackson. These are all really good actors, and there are some good moments to them. There's a really good scene with William Hurt and him sort of recalling these events in the war and something that he had to do. I thought that was a very effective scene, but there just isn't enough of it. There's not enough that they do with these characters to really get you invested. And they do have flashbacks in the beginning of the movie, and they were actually really interesting at first. I actually was enjoying what was going on there, but after a while, they just become kind of monotonous because there just isn't a lot to them. You don't really give a shit about anything that's going on, and I think that's what really holds this film back. It's just done in the most boring way possible. And it also really feels like they were trying to push this hard to be an Oscar film. And it's mainly because this was a film that I remember was supposed to come out in like October, but it was pushed to January, which is never a good sign. And it very much does show why, because there just really isn't anything that this movie has to offer in terms of a compelling story. There are some good performances here, but there just really isn't that much to this one. So C- for Last Full Measure. There's an ending that I do think is kind of effective overall, but at the end of the day, there's way better films like this out there. This is just not really worth seeing at all, and it's pretty easy to tell why like nobody's really talked about it, because it's not really anything that special. All right, so the rhythm section, this looked like the most January movie ever. This was one of those movies where I got the trailer constantly like before it was coming out, and so that's partially why I was like not looking forward to this as much as I was. And I will say it's not as boring as I thought it was. It's just very unremarkable, and I think a big reason for that is because of the way the story is told. It's very jumbled in that way, to the point where it's generally hard to tell when things are going on, because you have this character, sometimes she's with Jude Law, but then sometimes she's like out on her own, and it's hard to tell what's going on in the story. I will say Blake Lively, as always, does a really good job here. She gives a very strong performance, and she does make a convincing argument that she can carry a movie like this. I would want to see Brie Larson do an action movie, because she definitely does have the chops. She actually does have a really good scene in this plane. It's like towards the end of the movie. That scene was badass, and she did a really good job there. I definitely believed her in this role. The problem is not her. Same with Jude Law. I liked what he was doing in the movie for the brief amount of time that he had. Like I said, just the way this story is told is just not very well done, because it's just very hard to tell what is going on and when things are happening, and it just feels like the movie is doing that just to keep you invested. Like, it's doing that in a way where it's like, oh, this story isn't interesting, so we're gonna try to break it up so we can keep people more interested, so they can try to piece things together. And it just, there's not really a lot going on. It's really just she's going after her family, and Sterling K. Brown is like affiliated with that, and that story had potential, but where they ended up going just didn't really satisfy me at all. And the way the movie ended especially just really felt like they were trying really hard to make this like a new franchise of sorts, and I just don't really think that's gonna happen at all. The movie did horrible when it first came out. I believe it was like 10th place at the box office, so like Yeah, I'm sorry, that's not happening. And, again, I can't say this one is bad. It didn't even bore me as much as I thought it was going to. I will say there are some really out of place music choices though. There's one scene with her training and they play the song that was in like the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood trailer, Straight Shooter, and it was just very jarring. I don't really know why that was in there. There's a lot of moments in this movie that are very tonally inconsistent, and it's just a little bit strange. There's moments that seem like they should be a lot darker, but like they're trying to add some comedy in there when it's really not necessary. So that kind of brings things down. Again, not at all a bad movie. It's definitely better than what I was expecting, but it's just not very memorable at all. C for the rhythm section. Not really much to say about this one other than it was not as generic as I thought it was going to be, but there just isn't really that much to love about it either. Like I said, Blake Lively really is the thing that carries the film, but other than that, there's just not much to this one. All right, Timmy, Failure, Mistakes Were Made. Very interesting movie because I watched this and I really like this film, but everyone else that I know that has seen this either really doesn't like it or fucking hates this movie. So it's kind of awkward for me to be talking about this one, but yeah, I enjoy this movie for the most part. In fact, out of the 3 Disney Plus movies that I had seen of the time, this one was actually my favorite. I think this is a very charming and fun film, and it's mainly due to its main star. I actually really like the main kid in the movie. His name is escaping me, but I thought he actually did a really solid job here. But again, a lot of people don't seem to agree with me on that. And I also did think that the story itself was really well done. It's a really good way of showing how kids, process grief and traumatic events in their life and how it can make them sort of go into this fantasy world of sorts and not make them want to face reality as much. And I think that's something that Timmy Failure did a really good job with. The reasoning for why Timmy is doing what he's doing, it does make a lot of sense. And yes, sometimes it can cause people harm, but the movie is a really good message about just being yourself and embracing your weirdness in that way. Timmy does have some really weird quirks about him, and because of that, a lot of people are turned off by him. But I think the movie does a really good job in getting you to understand his very imaginative mind, and the dream sequences that he'd have as well, like the fantasy sequences, were really reminding me of like A Christmas Story and things like that. They weren't nearly as like crazy as that, but I actually really like the fantasy sequences here. I thought there were a lot of fun moments there, and there's a lot of great humor in this movie, whether it's from the main kid, but also from Wallace Shawn as this teacher who is just constantly on Timmy, but always a lot of fun to watch here. Kyle Bornheimer, I liked a lot as well. He is the stepfather to Timmy, and Timmy is not very welcoming towards this guy, let's just say. He doesn't really want much to do with him, really at all, and you can see that Bornheimer's character, he's doing everything he possibly can to try to bond with Timmy, and I actually really like where his character ended up going. If they were to make another Timmy Failure film, which this film does heavily hint at the fact there is going to be a sequel, I do want to see more of that dynamic, because I like what they are setting up there. I also really liked the actress that played the mom here. I thought she was very strong. You can understand that, she wants to do what's best for her son, but at the same time, she herself is worried about what this is really doing to him and things like that. I thought she did a really excellent job here. Craig Robinson, there's a lot I really liked about this movie. If I had to have some flaws, I would say, though, the polar bear that follows Timmy around, I was a bit confused by, because throughout a bunch of the movie, they make it fairly obvious that this thing is an imaginary friend, but then there are points in the movie where it seems like they are acknowledging this polar bear. So Total as a character, I just don't think really worked here. It's one of those things where I kind of feel like they could have just removed it entirely. I didn't really feel like, I understand that was in the book, but I just don't think that translated all that well. And all of Timmy's friends just felt very underwritten. I didn't really feel like we got to know them as well as we could have, whether it was his rival or this girl that he likes or his friend. We didn't get to know these characters as much as I would have wanted to. So that does slightly bring things down. But overall, I can't can't really complain all that much because I did think this was a very charming and fun film, and I definitely enjoyed it more than most. So B for Timmy Failure. I definitely enjoyed this one quite a bit. To All the Boys, P.S. I Love You is an interesting one because there are some things that I really do like about the sequel. I still do like the characters. I still think Lana Condor is very strong here, and I do think she still does have good chemistry with Noah Centineo and things like that, and I do like the addition of Jordan Fisher. I think that those two do work pretty well together overall, and there are some really fun moments here. I think this is definitely a very fun movie, but at the end of the day, my biggest problem with this film is that it really does not do much of anything to justify its own existence. The plot of this movie is quite literally just Lara Jean has two guys that are fighting over her, and she has to, like, choose between the two of them, and that's really it. And look, I understand the first movie was not the most complex thing in the world. No, it was not. But I actually thought that in addition to the love story with her and Peter, we actually did have a really good, character arc for Lara Jean, with her grieving over her mother and her trying to move past that and things like that. I thought was actually a really solid character arc. In this movie, there's really nothing for her to do in terms of a character. It's quite literally just her trying to pick these guys, and it just isn't very interesting at all, mainly because it's a very predictable story as to where it's going. I mean, it feels like the movie starts off and her and Peter are on good terms, and then all of a sudden she starts to realize that, like, things aren't really working out there, so then she ends up going to John Ambrose, and these two, while, like I said, Jordan Fisher is good, one, his casting is really weird because the original guy was like pasty white and Jordan Fisher is not, so it's a very jarring casting choice, and they're trying to make it seem like it's always been that way, and that's very strange to me. And I hate how that actor got, like, fucked over. Like, he even said on, like, Instagram that he didn't know that, like, they had, like, recasted his part and things like that, so I really hate that. But then add on to the fact that John Ambrose as a character, while fun, it's very obvious where he's going to go throughout the movie. You know exactly how this is going to play out. And again, the movie is fun. That's the thing that's frustrating about it, is that I was having fun with this movie. There's a lot of really funny moments in there. There's even some things I think are a little bit better. The character of Jen, for example, is way better this time around. She's not in the movie a lot, but there's actually a really good scene between her and Lara Jean, and you can tell she's trying to move past this. She's trying to be more of a friend to her, and I really wish we would have seen more of her in this movie, because I feel like there was an opportunity to maybe do something there, and they really didn't. There was also an opportunity to focus more on the fact that these characters are going to be graduating soon, and so they're trying to do everything they can to move past some of the drama, but they don't really get into that either. There's a really forced subplot with John Corbett's character as well that could have been really good if it had not come in, like, the last act of the movie. It doesn't really show up until the third act, and it's just too late for them to really go anywhere with that. Anna Cathcart, I really liked her in the first movie, but here, she's really just here to be the annoying little sister, and that's it. They will oftentimes use her for, like, exposition and things like that, and I don't know, I really just didn't find the sequel to be that necessary. It's not bad. In fact, I did have a good time with it throughout. It's kind of strange. Like, it's a movie that I don't really like, but I can say that I definitely did have a good time throughout a good portion of it. But as the movie went on, I just kept thinking, like, is this really needed? Do we really need this movie? What was there to really tell? And to be honest, I just don't think there was much of a story to tell here. I understand that the book is a very similar plot, but I just don't think that this movie needed to happen. I just don't think it was necessary. So, unfortunately, I can't really recommend this one. Like I said, Lana Condor, many of the actors are still very strong, but overall, it just really didn't do all that much for me. So I'd say C+ for To All the Boys, P.S. I Love You. Enjoyable, but honestly pretty unnecessary overall. It's definitely not nearly as good as as the first one. A Shaun the Sheep movie, Farmageddon, on the other hand, now that is a sequel that actually does do a really good job of justifying its existence, mainly because it's kind of like, you know, where they're going with these Shaun the Sheep movies, they kind of approach them like a Wallace and Gromit type thing, where they're all basically one-offs, and I think that is the best approach for something like this. But even though it is a one-off, they don't ignore the character development of the first movie. It still is very much there, but it's just a new adventure for these characters. And overall, I really love this one quite a bit. Not just the animation, which I think is even more creative this time around, especially when it comes to this alien that we're following around throughout the movie. I loved the design of this alien, just the world and things like that. The world building is very strong here, and I think they did a really good job. But the central story as well, with Shaun trying to help this alien go back to like her home planet and things like that, I thought was really well done. I found myself really getting invested in the bond between these two. They really do kind of bring out the best in each other, and Shaun is still such a fun lead character. You still really do find yourself rooting for him, and there is actually a really good arc with him as to, you know, realizing that this character, Lula, is someone that is just as important, which I think is a really good arc overall. And I have to say, the character of Lula stole the whole movie for me. I fucking loved this character. She was so funny. She's almost mischievous, but even more mischievous than Shaun, honestly. Like, she makes Shaun look like a very, like, authoritative sort of character. Like, she is very rebellious, and she's a lot of fun to watch, but she also does have a really good backstory to her, and I just found myself really loving this character quite a bit. I think she's a really great addition in there, and where they end up going with Shaun's story, the way they get the character of Bitzer in there as well, I just thought was really creative. There's a lot of fun directions that they go in the third act of this movie that I really did like, but it also does tug at your heartstrings quite well, because you, like I said, you do care for Lula as a character. You want her to, you know, come back to her home planet. You understand why that's so important for her, and so they do a really good job of getting you to connect with that character. And again, it's impressive me because it's all without dialogue. I don't know how they're able to do it, but they still find a way to get you to care for all these characters, and that's something I really did appreciate. Even the villain in this movie, who I didn't really like that much at first, I really liked where they end up going with her. Agent Red, she's not just she starts off at first, and she's your typical sort of, you know, task force agent that is trying to prove that aliens are real, but it's a little bit more than just that. She herself, has had a run-in with aliens in her past, and so she's kind of devoted a lot of her life to trying to prove that they're real and that they do exist. And where they end up going with her, I thought was brilliant. I love where they end up taking her character, and I thought that Kate Harbour did such a great job voicing this character. I really love what she ended up doing in this film. So again, there's a lot that really does work about this movie. I think it's very funny. I think it's very creative. The only thing that doesn't really work for me is the subplot involving the farmer and everyone else. I just didn't find myself getting that invested in it. They don't really do a lot with the other characters in this movie. It's kind of just the farmer realizes what's going on. He wants to turn it into like an amusement park of sorts, and it just doesn't really go anywhere that interesting. I think they could have done a better job with that subplot, but really other than that, I think this is such a delightful and entertaining sequel that does a really good job of showing how else they can build on this world. And if this is what they're going to do moving forward, I'm all for it. You know, give us one of these like every few years and I'll be perfectly fine with it, because I think this absolutely lived up to the hype for me. Definitely a B+ for a Shaun the Sheep movie, Farmageddon. I hate the fact that this wasn't in theaters, but I'm also glad that it wasn't, because more people are probably going to see it now because it's on Netflix and things like that. And especially during this time, it's a really great family movie to watch. Definitely can't recommend this one enough. In fact, out of all of the movies I'm talking talking about in this Catch review, it is actually the one that I did love the most. So I definitely would recommend this one for sure. Great stuff. All right, Extracurricular is a very interesting film because on one hand, I think this film does a really good job at kind of showing these kids that are very privileged and things like that, have these very successful high school careers. You know, they are always getting they're getting great grades, they're things like that. They're at the top of their class, but at the same time, they don't really know what they want to do, and there's always more to them than meets the eye. And I think there is a really good message there, and the way they kind of use that as an allegory with them being these serial killers of sorts, and the fact that they do this basically as a way to get away from all the stress, I think is actually really clever. It's a really good way of showing how, you know, people that are so, are so well-renowned in high school, and they just have so much pressure put on them. They try to do something that is almost seen as blasphemous because they wouldn't do that. They try to do something to get away from all the stress. And I think that this film does do a really good job with that. And where it ends up going with that story, I thought was really well done. But my main problem with this movie is that the characters that we're following, you just don't really get to know all that much of. So, I'm not saying I didn't care for them, because I think that these actors did a really good job in showing the difficulties with these characters, how some of them are trying to get away from what they're doing, but some of them are very much addicted. You have one character that is so addicted to killing that, like, he needs to make sure that this goes down, that they, you know, they do commit this break-in, that there's nothing that's going to deviate from it. But then you have a character that's like, okay, maybe we don't have to be as rough about it. Then you have one that's trying to get away from it entirely. So they do a good job of giving you the baseline of what these characters are going through, but there just isn't a lot to them, aside from the character of Miriam, who I actually did end up really liking. I thought she was probably my favorite character in this movie. I really liked where they end up taking her, but I have to say, if you don't like where this film is going at first, I think the third act will absolutely, I think the third act will absolutely win you over, because it goes in such a dark and realistic direction that I really was not expecting at all. This film got really bleak in the third act, and I thought that it was fantastic. I love where they end up going with it. It's so riveting in that way, and I don't want to get into exactly what happens, but let's just say things do not go the way that they intended, and holy shit, do they not hold back in terms of, you know, just what can happen to these characters. And I think they do such a great job with that. And Luke Goss, I also really liked in the movie. He plays this police officer that you can tell really does care for these kids. He sees a lot of potential in them, but they feel that pressure. They don't want to be these, you know, they don't want to be in these, like, elitist sort of groups. They don't want to be like that. They want to do something that is out of the ordinary. They want to do something that is essentially frowned upon, because it's the only way they can get away from all the stress. And I think the film does do a really good job with that overall. It definitely has a lot of fun moments in there, but again, it's a better film than I really was expecting it to be. There is a lot that I do like about this movie. It's just the characters I don't think are as well fleshed out as they could have been, and I do think that does bring this down just a bit. But overall, I found myself definitely enjoying this one. I think it's definitely worth checking out, if only just for just how chaotic that third act really gets, where it really does get insane pretty quickly. So B- for Extracurricular. Definitely better than I was expecting for sure, and I would overall recommend this one. Holy shit, where do I even begin with Brahms the Boy 2? Look, this is a movie that me and my friends would constantly joke about it not ever coming out, because it was a movie that we knew was in production, and it just kept getting moved off the schedule. I remember it was supposed to come out in like December of like 2019, and then it got delayed, and it was supposed to be, I think, it was supposed to be like, I think, August of last year, and then it got delayed to like December December, and now it finally and then it finally came out in February. I really didn't think it was gonna come out, but it did, and it's very easy to tell why, because this is easily one of the poorest excuses for horror sequels that I have seen in such a long time. And look, I'll say right off the bat, if you guys didn't see my review for the first movie of The Boy, I don't like the twist at the end of that movie. I think it's really dumb and pretty just nonsensical. It's one of those twists that I think is a cool idea, but it really just doesn't make any sense at all, and it doesn't work for the story that they were trying to tell. But I've said this so many times before, and I feel like a broken record at this point. When you establish something in a movie, regardless of what it is, when you establish something, and you have to make sure that you retain that. You have to make, if it's canon, you have to make sure that it's canon. It's much better writing than to just build on what didn't work and rather than just, retcon it entirely. But that's what William Brent Bell decides to do here, which is very odd to me considering that he is the director of the first movie. It's like he didn't even understand his first movie, because he goes in a completely different direction here. It's all supernatural now. The doll's very much alive. The whole twist of some other guy that was doing it, that's all thrown out the window. They try to explain it, and it just doesn't work at all. And I think that's the biggest hurdle that this movie has to overcome. Just everything they do is so haphazard, and they do it in such a lazy manner that it's very hard to buy into any of it. Also, nothing really happens for a movie that's supposed to be a sequel, and for a movie that retcons so much. There's really not a lot that happens here until the third act. A lot of it is just buildup, and it's not interesting buildup. It's just Katie Holmes doesn't believe her son. Her son isn't talking because of some traumatic event that went down, and she's being haunted by the doll and things like that, and it's just not a very interesting plot line at all. And the film doesn't even really get all that creative in terms of what they want to do with this doll. And again, it's so lazy to me the way it's done. It doesn't feel like there were any interesting ideas in this movie. All the interesting ideas were pretty much thrown out here. There's one interesting idea with Ralph Ineson at first, and I kind of liked it. I liked where they were going with him as a character. Ralph Ineson's an actor that I like quite a bit. I've liked him since things like The Witch and things like that, and he for a while is the best part of this movie. But then they go in this ridiculous direction with him in the third act, and it's what are you even saying? What does this even mean? How do you believe what you're believing? And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's a lot of things in this movie that just don't make any sense. Katie Holmes is an actress that I don't really think that much of, and she's not very good in this. She definitely does seem pretty bored in this movie, and then her husband as well. He's just naive. That's all he really is. He's just the naive husband that doesn't believe any of what's going on, and he's downplaying the whole thing. He's just kind of stupid. And then the child actor in this movie, though, is maybe the worst part of this entire film. He's just so unconvincing, and especially considering a lot of the movie, he has to emote without actually speaking. He does not do a convincing job with that at all, and that really is what brings this film down. So there's just a myriad of things that just don't work in this movie. And again, the way the movie wraps up is so predictable, and it's just one of those films where you just question why this was ever made. Why did William Brent Bell think this was a good idea, other than we just needed some money? This could have been put into literally anything. He could have made an original film, but for some reason he decided to tie it to The Boy, a film that I don't even think is that loved by many people. I mean, there was a girl in my TV production class in my sophomore year of college that clearly that cared about the movie enough for me that she wanted me to review it. But other than that, I don't think there are many people that care that much about The Boy. So was there really a push for there to be a sequel? I don't really think there was, and unfortunately, it's even worse than you really could have imagined. D for Brahms The Boy 2. Really cannot stand this one at all. Easily one of the worst horror films of the year. And that's saying a lot, because this has been a pretty terrible year for horror overall. Come to Daddy really surprised me, because if you watch the trailer of this movie, the entire film makes it seem like it's just really these two actors, Elijah Wood and then his father, played by Martin Donovan. You think that's the whole movie. You think that most of it is going to be these two slowly growing more and more increasingly annoyed with the other, and them, basically just going into madness and things like that. And that's not really what it is. I can't really say a lot of what happens, but it's a much different movie than I was expecting. This is actually much more of a dark comedy than you really would expect it to be, and it's a damn good one at that. And again, all these things I'm saying, like, these are good things. Like, Elijah Wood is so good in this movie. He does a really good job of, at first, basically playing the audience, where he's just, like, really freaked out. He doesn't really know what's going on. He doesn't know how to explain a lot of what's happening. But then, as the movie goes on, he starts to go in a much different direction than I was expecting, and it's probably his most impressive performance, I would say, since, honestly, Wilfred. I was very impressed by what he ended up doing in this movie, and his father as well is really well casted. He does a really good job of just really getting under your skin. You wonder, like, why would anyone, want to, why would anyone want to, be with this guy? Why would anyone not tell Elijah Wood about him? And then you can kind of realize, like, oh, that's why. So they do a really good job of peeling back the layers of both of these characters. But then when it takes the turn in the second act of the movie, that's when this really gets great. That's when this really goes in a much different direction than I was expecting. So I really enjoyed this one quite a bit. I think there's a lot of funny moments in here for sure. I think it's definitely one of those horror films that it's gonna only appeal to certain people. I think there's some people that are not going to like this movie because of how weird it gets and just how much it changes tonally in its second act. But I was all for it. I really loved what they were doing here. I really didn't have any problem with that whatsoever. So I think it definitely works. I think this is a really fun movie overall. The cinematography as well is so good in this movie. It's very stylistic in that way. And I also really loved the score here. It kind of felt like something out of like an 80s horror film. There's a lot of things this movie does really well that I definitely really did enjoy. It starts off, like I said, as a really good psychological thriller between these two characters, and then it takes a turn of sorts and gets even better. So I definitely recommend this one. I think this is definitely a really well done film for sure that did actually a really good job, I think, of hiding what it actually was in the trailers, which is kind of hard to do these days, but this movie definitely did that very well. So B+ for Come to Daddy, way better than I really was expecting. I was already looking forward to it, but it was even better than I really could have imagined it to be, and I just found myself very impressed by this movie. Buffaloed is another one that actually really surprised me quite a bit. This film looked very annoying and just obnoxious, but that's really not what it is at all. It's actually a really good story about this character, Peg Doll, who essentially is this, young woman that is just very unsatisfied with the way things are going. She's in New York, and she's doing everything she can to get out of it. She wants to be able to go to, good schools and things like that, but she has a family that just isn't that financially stable at all, and so because of that, she finds herself, scheming quite a bit. She is very much a con artist in that way. She will very often try to trick people into doing things for money, but there's always good intent behind it, and I think a lot of that is due to how good Zoe Deutsch is in this movie, who, I say it all the time, but she is just continually proving why she's one of the best talents out there, and she just really shines in these kind of roles where she gets to play these really sort of eccentric characters, because yes, it's very clear a lot of what Peg is doing is completely unethical and definitely not at all the right approach, but she's always doing it not for just herself, but for her family as well. She's trying to do everything she can to get out of this situation, and I really liked where they end up taking her character, where she starts working for Jai Courtney's character, who this is definitely one of his better roles for sure. I thought he was hilarious in this movie. I loved what he ended up doing as this big owner of this huge conglomerate that's just a dick to everyone. I thought he's just sexist and things like that. Just a really fun role overall. I really like what he ended up doing there. But then how she opens her rivalry business scheme, I thought was a lot of fun. They do a lot of really great stuff there for sure. Again, there's a lot of fun moments throughout this movie, and again, some of the directions then of going was not really what I was expecting, because like I said, a lot of this film can be very fun, and I do think the film also does a really good job with showing you, what debt collectors really do, just how taxing of a job that really can be, and things like that. I also really liked her relationship in the movie with Jermaine Fowler's character. I thought he ended up being a lot of fun. You think he's going to start off as like the cliched cop, but they kind of go in a more like romantic direction with his character, and it definitely really did work quite a bit. There's also a direction they take with Judy Greer's character where she really gets to shine in this movie. And I know I always talk about how like Judy Greer is an actress that I never really feel is utilized in the right way. This is honestly one of her better roles. She has a really good scene in this movie where she really gets to see what she's gone through as a character, because Peg is not very fond of her. She feels like her mother isn't really helping her out in the way she should, and you get to kind of see a scene in her perspective that I actually really liked. I thought it was one of the best scenes in the movie, and they do a really good job with that. So yeah, there's a lot to really like about this one for sure. I think it's just a very fun, and again, it's mainly centered around just such a likable lead character who, again, is doing a lot of terrible things, but Deutsch keeps her likable. You understand why she's doing them, and I think they did a really good job with that. The way the movie ended as well, I thought was really well done. The movie has a lot to say about, addiction to this kind of stuff. It's very clear that Peg isn't just doing this for that motivation she states. She very quickly does get addicted to it, and she can't really stop. And I think the film has a lot to say about why con artists do what they do, why they never really stop conning people. And you definitely do see that with Peg's character in this movie. So just a much better film than I really was expecting. It certainly had way more to say than I was expecting as well. Just one that I definitely recommend. I don't think it's amazing or anything, and the main thing I think that does bring it down is that a lot of it does feel pretty rushed. The first half especially, they really rushed through a lot of Peg's childhood, what she went through, things like that. They especially rushed through her getting to meet Jai Courtney's character. That's like the first 13 minutes of the movie. So I do think the first half is a little rocky with the way it tells its story, and it does take a little while to fully get you into, just because the movie is always moving full speed ahead at every second. But I think once we get to her starting her own independent company, that's when this really gets great. And that's when I really started to like the movie a lot more. So I definitely would recommend this one for sure. I think it's definitely a much better film than I was expecting. So B for Buffalo, definitely one of the better films I'm talking about in this one for sure. Spencer Confidential is basically what you would expect out of a Berg and Wahlberg collaboration these days. And unfortunately, that's not very good. I will say this right now. This is a much better film than Mile 22. It is not at all on that level. But the problem with this movie is just, it's not very interesting at all. It's fairly generic. You have Mark Wahlberg's character who, he's been released from prison after all these years for, something that he did. And now because of the situation, he's going after the person that put him in prison, and we've seen this concept done 1,000 times before. Wahlberg is a likable actor. I've talked about this before, but he just doesn't really have a lot to work with here. He's basically just playing a guy that just has a bunch of one-liners, and there just wasn't a lot to him here. And then Winston Duke as well. I definitely felt a good chemistry between them. Like, I felt that these two were working well together, but I just never really felt that invested in this story. Where it ended up going, I just didn't think was particularly interesting. Alan Arkin, I actually did think was pretty good. He definitely got some laughs out of me, but that's because he's Alan Arkin. He's naturally a very funny actor in that way. He's even funny in bad movies like Santa Claus 3, for example. So he's always a likable actor, I feel. Definitely he's not at all the problem with this movie. It's just the way it's done, it's way too long. You definitely do feel the length throughout. It's never particularly all that fun because it's going in very cliche directions that you really are expecting. You have the guy that was in prison and him trying to be reformed to like a cop and things like that. It's just, you've seen this done 1,000 times before. And then the actual reveal of like what's going on is so predictable. They don't really do anything that different with it. So yeah, there isn't really a lot to say about this one. It didn't really do all that much for me at all. And it sucks because I do think there was a time when Peter Berg and Mark Wahlberg working together was a match made in heaven. But I really do feel that it's ran its course at this point. I really do feel that we're at a point where it just isn't working as well as it once did. And I don't know if it's because the other ones they did were based on true stories and this one is based off a book. The other one was an original film, or if it's just it was a thing that worked once and now it's just not working anymore. But either way, it just didn't really do anything that all that much for me. But again, I'll certainly take it over Mile 22. It's way better than that, but it's just not really all that great. So C for Spencer Confidential. Not much to say about this one really at all. Just very, very disposable. And the final movie I'm going to be talking about in this catch-up review is another Disney Plus film, that one being Stargirl. And unfortunately, while, like I said, a lot of my friends didn't like Timmy Failure, and I felt like I was kind of like in a minority with that amongst my friend group, this one, if they were to tell me they didn't like it, I would agree. Because for me, this is the first Disney Plus film that really feels like one. This really feels like a movie that Disney acquired at the last second because they needed a film to come out in March. They needed a Disney Plus film original, and so they picked up this one, and it just is very, very generic. There just isn't a lot to like about this film. I will say, the things that work in this movie is actually most of the cast here. Most of them do a really good job, particularly Grace VanderWaal. I've liked Grace VanderWaal quite a bit. When I used to watch America's Got Talent, which I really don't watch that anymore, but I remember that she won that season, and I thought that she was very talented there, and I never really knew if she could act, but she's surprisingly really good in this movie. She's one of those actresses that just is consistently likable and fun and just someone you really like watching. She really keeps this movie watchable. She keeps you from getting utterly bored because she's just so damn likable in the role. She brings a lot of presence here. This kind of is like a star-making debut, and I definitely want to see more from her as an actress because she certainly does have it in her. I think she definitely does do a really good job in this movie. And then Graham Vicharo as well, who actually is our main character. I liked him too. I thought he definitely did have a nice presence to him, and I thought that the chemistry between these two, they definitely did work very well together. They had some really nice scenes. I think some of the best parts of the movie are just those two interacting, and I definitely really did appreciate that. The problem with the movie is that the story going on is so been there, done that. It starts off actually kind of interesting. We get into how our main character has suffered this loss of his dad, and he always like carried around this tie of him, but you know, people picked on him and things like that. I'm like, okay, this is actually a really interesting story. You know, you're seeing how this has affected him, and I was really thinking they do something with that. They really don't do all that much with it until later on, which I'll get into. But they don't really do all that much with it, unfortunately. And what we get instead is a highly generic story of this guy. He meets this girl who is pretty much perfect. There's really nothing wrong with Stargirl at all. She's somehow able to, like, make this losing football team win just through her singing. She's able to, like, you know, do all of these just crazy things. There's so many things she's able to do, and you never really understand why. They don't ever do a really good job of like, how is she doing this stuff? Is she like magical or something like that? They just don't do a very good job with that at all. But then where they eventually end up taking the story, like the central conflict, is absolutely ridiculous. It's one of the dumbest that I've seen in a movie like this in quite a bit. And it makes our lead character honestly really unlikable. I was really not liking him throughout a good portion of this movie just because of the way he was treating Stargirl, because she is different from everyone else, and he's like thrown off by that. He doesn't like how eccentric she is and things like that, and it goes in a really weird direction. There's also some things they could have done with Stargirl as a character that they don't really do, unfortunately. There's a whole scene where she's like asked to, join like the cheerleading squad and things like that, but we don't really get to see that. We get to see her sing and we get to see them do all these great routines, but we don't actually get to see her contribute anything to that group. We don't actually get to see, what is she doing? How is she bonding with them? Why do they care so much about her all of a sudden? Do they actually care about her? Or are they just using her? These are not things the movie really gets into, and it's mainly because it's all surrounded around our lead character. Every single scene pretty much is our lead character. We don't really get any time separate from him, and I think that actually does hold this movie back. I think this movie actually would have worked better if it maybe would have been on both of their perspectives, because Stargirl is just such a much more inherently interesting character than our lead in that way. He just becomes very boring after a while, and his show that he does with Karen Brar's character is so ridiculous and stupid. Karen Brar, I could not stand in this movie. I didn't think he was bad acting-wise, but his character is really bad here. He was really rubbing me the wrong way. But the film also, and again, I will say that the songs that Stargirl performs, they're honestly pretty good. There's a lot of bangers in there that I definitely really did enjoy. They're definitely very entertaining, and I could watch those scenes on their own, but just the story is just not very good. The film also does not utilize a lot of its cast very well at all. You have Darby Stanchfield and Giancarlo Esposito in this movie, and the movie has no idea what to do with them. There's one really good scene with Darby Stanchfield, and then Giancarlo Esposito, he's literally just like the mentor to our lead character. That's really all he is in this movie. He serves as a mentor towards him, who, again, you can tell he's such a forgettable character that I can't even remember like our lead character's name, but I also don't really understand why he need to be in this movie. I like Giancarlo Esposito as much as the next guy, but like, I didn't really find a point to him at all. He's really just kind of here just to be like the old, stern and wiser sort of mentor, and I just didn't really care much for him. I didn't think he served much of a purpose. And then the ending of this movie is so corny. Like I said, the thing with his dad, like, passing away, it does come back at the end, and what they decide to do with it is so stupid. It makes literally no sense at all. Where they end up taking the Stargirl character is just absolutely insane, and it's just so nonsensical. So I think that's really the biggest problem with this movie. There was definitely potential behind it, but they didn't focus on the interesting things, and it ends up going in a very nonsensical and really dumb direction. It does have a good message of like being yourself and being different and things like that, but it's one we've seen 1,000 times before. The movie doesn't really do anything that different with it, and so as a result, we get a film that, I hate saying it, but honestly, writing-wise, it does very much feel like a Disney Channel movie that is just better made, better acting, has more to offer on that sense, has a bigger scale, but it really does feel that way because the plot is so generic and so stupid, and they don't really do anything that different with it that you haven't seen 1,000 times before. So yeah, this is really just the first Disney Plus movie that did almost nothing for me. Again, very likable lead character, a very likable, presence in Grace Vanderbilt. I see a lot of potential in her. I did like the lead actor here, but just this movie itself, I just really didn't like all that much. So C for Stargirl. Definitely has its moments, but overall, it's just really not worth your time, and definitely feels like a movie that Disney could have easily passed on for sure. And if this is what we're gonna get on Disney Plus now, like just movies that Disney passed on, so they just dump it onto Disney Plus, I'm not at all for it, because this is not at all the direction that they need to be going in. And that's it, guys. Those are all the movies I'm going to be talking about in this catch-up review. I know this one was definitely on the shorter side compared to others, but again, I just figured that with all the stuff that's going on, and considering I'm going to be reviewing a lot of stuff that I normally would just wait to review in a catch-up review, I might as well just do it now. But either way, guys, for this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, guys, just really really hope you guys are staying safe out there. Wash your hands, you know, practice social distancing, and try to stay home as much as possible. All that stuff is very important, of course. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.